Hello everybody, I am Jarrett Ross, the GeneaVlogger, and welcome back to another video where I review your DNA and genealogy questions. If you have a question you'd like me to answer in this series, be sure to go to my subreddit r/GeneaVlogger and post your question there with the proper tag. The questions have been stacking up pretty high, and I'm still answering stuff that's been posted from like 2 months ago. So if you've got something, the sooner you post it, the sooner I'll get to it. Let's jump in. Please review my DNA from Ancestry DNA, 14 different regions. So let's see, we've got Nigeria, 34%, Cameroon, Congo, Western Bantu peoples, 25%, Benin and Togo, 9%, Mali, 8%, Ivory Coast and Ghana, 7%, Senegal, 6%, Wales, 4%, Indigenous Americas North, 1%, Sweden and Denmark, 1%, Portugal, 1%, England and Northwestern Europe, 1%, Scotland, 1%, Southern Italy, 1%, and the Balkans, 1%. So a whole lot of 1%, meaning a whole lot of trace results, although all these 1%, except for the Indigenous Americas, are all European, so it might just be that whatever European ancestry this person has, it's just really difficult to decipher. Now, based on this reading with the mixture of African as well as the little bits of European and Native American, I'm guessing this person may be some sort of African American, maybe a Afro-Caribbean. Now, assuming this person is African American, then they are on the higher end of a African percentage. Usually the percentage of African for people who are African American is around about 75%. And being that this person has basically about 10% of their DNA coming from European, if it's all coming from one ancestor, that would be the equivalent of a great-grandparent. But if they are African American, then it's more than likely coming through multiple different lines of the family. And that might be also why there are so many different little readings, because each of these little readings, or possible groups of some of these little readings, may be coming from different ancestors. So instead of it all coming from one great-grandparent, maybe on the mom's side, through the mom's side, there's a European ancestor from the 1700s, and then the mom's dad's side, there's a European ancestor also from the 1700s, and then the dad's side might also have some European ancestry through one line being, Sweden and Denmark, and then another line being Portuguese. So if this person were to do their genealogy and they are African American, my guess is that if they were trying to find that European ancestry, they're going to likely be looking fairly far back, at least second great-grandparents, but probably further. And as for the 1% Indigenous Americas, that could be representative of some sort of Native American ancestry. And if that is the case, then this person may want to try to get their parents or maybe aunts or uncles, or even if they have their grandparents available to do a DNA test, have them test and see if they can figure out what line it's coming through. Because at 1%, it's going to be really, really distant. Maybe third great-grandparents, maybe fourth great-grandparents, but more than likely fifth or sixth or even further. But getting the older generations may give you a better idea, because maybe you just didn't inherit as much, but you get your parents to test, and then all of a sudden you see your dad has 6%, and well, at 6% DNA, that would be the equivalent of about second great-grandparents, which would be your third great-grandparents. But the one big thing to say is that all of this is just a lot of hypothesizing based on the typical what is seen when these are the readings. But I could be completely wrong, and this person has a very different background. This person might have been born in Africa. Their European ancestry is coming obviously through a different way, and there's a whole different story to what their reading's coming out to be. So whenever I'm saying things like this, like, well, it could be this, it could be that, you have to focus on the fact that it's a hypothesis, and it's going to take further research to prove or disprove. So let's jump to the next one. Ancestry DNA Results. My maternal ancestry is Dutch and UK. They've been in North America since circa 1600. Most of my DNA matches have been from my mother's mother's family, which was Dutch. My paternal great-grandparents came from Germany to America between 1840 and 1880. Although my grandparents were born in America, why would Germanic Europe be so low? DNA results from Ancestry DNA. Can we zoom in? All right. So we have England and Northwestern Europe, 47%, Sweden and Denmark, 26%, Germanic Europe, 15%, Scotland, 6%, Ireland, 3%, Wales, 3%, Indigenous Americas, less than 1%. So it seems the main question is, why is the Germanic Europe so low? I think they said they were expecting 25% because their great-grandparents were from Germany, which would then mean that their grandparents, the great-grandparents' child, is German, and thus would be 25% of the person's DNA, and here it's only coming up as 15%. And I think this goes to just something that's been a common theme in a lot of these videos. It's the fact that it's really difficult to decipher between Germanic Europe and Sweden and Denmark and England and Northwestern Europe and Scotland and Ireland and Wales, and they can do an all right job in, kind of deciphering between those, but it's not perfect. So more than likely, the reason why they're not getting 25% Germanic Europe or higher is because some of that German ancestry they're getting from those great-grandparents isn't completely Germanic Europe, or at least it's not being read as completely Germanic Europe. So it might be included in the Sweden and Denmark, might be included in the England and Northwestern Europe, which makes a lot of sense, being a 47%, and Northwestern Europe, well, technically Germany and, a lot of areas that would include Germanic Europe are what would be considered Northwestern Europe. Now, you do also mention matches and say that most of your DNA matches are coming from your mother's family, which was Dutch, but then this German side seems to be your paternal great-grandparents, you said, so that'd be your paternal grandparent, one of them. So are you not getting matches that you were expecting from this side? Because it is possible that maybe there is an MPE, misattributed parental event. So maybe one of the ancestors that you think is your ancestor isn't actually your biological ancestor. So there are a few ways that this could go, but the best thing to figure it out is through matches. So if you have cousins on your father's side, especially through this Germanic side, and you ask them to do a DNA test, then you should expect them to show up as DNA matches if you truly are related. If they do a DNA test and they don't show up, then that's showing that somewhere in the family tree there is an MPE. Could be on your side, could be on their side. And if that is the case, it could be why the Germanic Europe is lower, because maybe that Germanic Europe you're expecting isn't actually in your ancestry. So here we have French Canadian ancestry, help is welcome. I'm a French Canadian from Quebec with a family tree on my heritage that currently contains around 1,700 plus of my ancestors going back to the late 1700s, 7 to 8 complete generations, with some others going back farther. I recently had my DNA tested by both MyHeritage and Nebula Genomics full genome sequencing, have had a hard time tracing some of my genetic heritage. First, while MyHeritage didn't even find traces of Native American lineage, almost every other tool I've used on my DNA data from both Nebula and MyHeritage show between 0.8 and 1.5% Native American ancestry, which would go back 7 to 8 generations, right? Yeah, it could be about, maybe further, maybe a little bit closer. Problem is that even after building an extensive tree, I can't find any of this Native American. Could it be a misreading? Or could it mean that multiple smaller DNA SNPs have been inherited from more ancient ancestry dating back the 1600s, which added up to my 1 to 1.5%? I know French Canadians have mixed quite a bit with the native populations. That would make sense. But what could be the most plausible answer to your knowledge? It is certainly possible that this is just a misread. Sure, it's coming up on multiple tools, but then it's not coming up on all the tools, and being, 1 to 1.5%, that's really, really, really traced. So certainly could be a misread of some sort. But you could be right in that it is representative of some more ancient ancestry that was more commonly mixed into your ancestry, hundreds of years back. Almost in the same way that a lot of people with Iberian ancestry will get small percentages of Jewish, because so many Jewish people who then converted to Catholicism during the Inquisition, then their descendants stayed Catholic and married into other Catholic families, and thus you get a lot of people with Iberian ancestry who have Jewish ancestry because there was just this mass conversion, and then they mixed with the local Iberian populations. So if the French Canadians were mixing a lot with the native populations, in the 1600s or 1700s or whenever it was, and you descend from a large group of that population, then it certainly is possible that you might get small chunks of DNA from that. Lastly, my heritage gives me 30% of Iberian ancestry, even though it doesn't show in my tree, going back 7 generations. Nothing from Spain, Portugal, Italy, or near. Is Iberian DNA common amongst French Canadians? I actually don't know if Iberian DNA is common among French Canadians. Here's what I know about my ancestry up to the late 1700s. All came from France, from La Rochelle to Normandy, or descended from French immigrants, except for a 6th great grandfather on the mom's side who was from Scotland. The whole family came to Canada and stayed culturally Scottish. So basically they have a lot of French and a little bit of Scottish. 57.3% North and West European, 30.9% Iberian, 9.8% Irish, Scottish, and Welsh, 2% Ashkenazi Jewish. And then for the genetic groups, French settlers in Canada, Quebec, French settlers in northeastern USA and in Canada, French settlers in Canada, French Canadians in Canada. So yeah, it's really picking up on that Canadian in the communities or in the genetic groups, which is a common thing. I find genetic groups in the communities on a lot of these DNA sites, like 23andMe does it. They are really good at getting pretty precise. I think MyHeritage does it too. Here we have Gedmatch with, I'm going to tell you, Gedmatch is not a very good one to use. These aren't quite updated as much, and I think a lot of these are actually really out of date. I know the one for the J test mix or whatever it's called, the person who made it actually did a blog post at some point saying don't use it, it's out of date and not reliable. But looking here, we see it's mostly North Atlantic, which is going to be your Northwestern European basically. We have 17.8% Baltic, 19.5% West Mediterranean, 2.57% West Asian, 7.72% East Mediterranean. So we're talking about Balkans, Greece, Turkey, and then, West Asia could include a lot, but kind of like Middle East and stuff like that. And we have Red Sea, 3.22%, and then a lot of small amounts of South Asian, Amerindian, Oceanian, Northeast African. I will say I find that with the Eurogenes K13, there always seems to be some sort of small reading of Amerindian in there. So I'd especially question the reliability on that Amerindian. Here we have another one of the Gedmatch admixtures, Eurogenes K9b, which I think the fact that you can just choose all these different admixtures, it basically becomes a pick your own admixture type of thing where people will go through and do a bunch of them and then focus on the ones that fit the narrative that they want to, or that they think for their family ancestry. So this one we see mostly North European, 66.47%, makes a lot of sense. 22.6% for Mediterranean, so they're just calling it one Mediterranean. Southwest Asian, 6.15%. Native American, 1.3%. Oceanian, 1.38%. Southeast Asian, South African, I think, and then I don't know what that other one is. Another admixture, like I said, pick your own admixture. Here we have World 9. So this is mostly Atlantic Baltic, which, yeah, that makes sense. The Atlantic Ocean, the Baltic Sea. 19.28% Southern. Does that mean Southern Europe? I'm not sure. I mean, like I said, there's so many of these options on Gedmatch for admixtures, and honestly, most genetic genealogists don't focus that much on admixture percentages. It's really not that useful for ethnicity percentages, and a lot of people try to dig all sorts of stuff out of this stuff when it's a lot of vagueness. It's trying to define vagueness. But anyway, then we get 9.6% Caucasus Gedrosia. Not sure how to say that. Then 0.15% African, 0.27% Australasian, and 0.72% South Asian. This is, what is this? DNA land, I think it is. But here we see West Eurasian 98%, broken down Southwestern European 40%, which they then break down into Southwestern European 37%. And 3.1% Sardinian, Northwest European 36%, South Central European 11%, Finnish 6.2%, Mediterranean Islander 2.4%, ambiguous 2.3, and then Native Oceanian 1.6. So now back to the main question about the Native American. Out of everything you showed, MyHeritage would be the one that I would trust more than anything else. I would trust it well beyond the Gedmatch stuff, and I don't know exactly about the reliability of DNA Land. So trying to draw out any sort of American ancestry or Native American ancestry from those Gedmatch tests and stuff, that is the wrong way to go about it. And unfortunately, that's kind of what I mean by people playing that choose your own admixture. Even the DNA Land didn't actually give you any sort of Native American. It gave you Native Oceanian, which is not the same as Native American. So I really wouldn't focus too much on the Native American ancestry because it seems very skeptical. And even if it is there, you may find as you keep going along, you eventually find some really, really distant ancestry that is Native American. But at the same time, you might have all sorts of different ancestries that you didn't inherit any genetic information from that ancestry, but you still have that ancestry, and you do enough tracing, you might find it. How can I get information on paternal side if I am a female? I've done the mtDNA and autosomal on family tree. I'm waiting for the results from Nebula. Does the autosomal include my father's side? I have no living male relatives. Thanks. Enjoy your YouTube channel and you are cute. Yes, autosomal is going to include your father's side because your autosomal DNA are those 23 pairs of chromosomes where one comes from your mom, one comes from your dad. So that autosomal is going to show both sides. And when you're looking at your X chromosome, if you have any sort of X matches, which you will see because you're doing it on family tree DNA, those matches could be from either your mom's side or your father's side. But the cool thing about that is that if you do have an X match with anyone on family tree DNA, then you know that relation won't be through your father's side. The reason being, your father didn't inherit any X chromosome DNA from his father, so whatever X chromosome DNA that you did inherit from your father, it's going to be all from your father's mother. But you also do have X chromosome DNA from your mom too, so it's not like every single match is going to be from your dad's mom. But if there are any matches where you figure out they're definitely from your dad's side and they're an X match, then you can rule out your dad's side and focus on your dad's mom's side. And then a major thing that a lot of people would say in this is, finding male relatives to then do Y-DNA tests, which you do say you have no living male relatives. But depending on how comfortable you are with reaching out to even more distant relatives, you might be able to find people that are through certain lines of your family that are a little bit more distant, maybe third cousins, fourth cousins, but maybe it's the same paternal line as your dad's paternal line. So if you get them to do a Y-DNA test, then supposedly whatever Y-DNA test they have should be the same as your dad's Y-DNA because they would match if they are of the same paternal ancestry, and then you could figure things out from that. And then another option is if you do have female cousins from your father's side, just having them do the family finder from family tree, the autosomal test, that will help you correlate with other matches in the database to figure out if they're on your dad's side. And then you can use those matches to trace out your father's tree further. So if you are trying to expand your father's side of the family tree, don't worry, you're still going to be able to do that using the autosomal DNA. Haplogroup. Is there a haplogroup for biblical Adam? Now, this question was actually answered really well by Enrique A3D, and they say, I don't think it works that way. Haplogroups are mutations in Y-DNA and mitochondrial DNA that can be used to differentiate a lineage from another. By the way, modern geneticists still use the term mitochondrial Eve and Y chromosomal Adam. That being said, assuming you do believe in the Bible and in Genesis in a literal way, Adam and Eve would be the common ancestor of all people. Their haplogroups are respectively A00 for Y-DNA and MT-Eve or MT-MRCA, which means most recent common ancestor. Now, one thing I have to say, a lot of geneticists actually hate the idea that that they're called mitochondrial Eve and Y chromosome Adam, because it really makes a lot of people misunderstand what those actually mean, because for one, a lot of people will think, oh, Adam and Eve, they were the first people, so that means that those were the first people. And well, no, those were not the first people. Those are just the most recent common ancestor of every single person in the world if you go up a single line of everybody's family. So for mitochondrial Eve, if you go up every single person's mother's lines, your mom's mom, all the way back through history, once you reach that point where you find a woman that every single person alive today, where they all descend specifically through that one line, their mom's pure line, that woman is known as mitochondrial Eve. And then same thing if you go up a purely paternal line, your father's line, that takes you to Y chromosomal Adam. But they didn't live at the same time. They lived at separate times, and there were a lot of other people alive at the same time too. It's just that their lines were the only ones to survive in that pure sense. And haplogroups are then the sub-branches, the descendants of mitochondrial Eve and Y chromosomal Adam, and just broken down based on the mutations. So as Enrique 3D said, these mutations are what allows us to then differentiate all of these different people into a big family tree, which is also known as a phylogenetic family tree. Now, I actually was able to hook myself into the Y full phylogenetic tree, and I did that by taking the Nebula whole genome sequence test, which allowed me to get into the Y phylogenetic tree and the mitochondrial phylogenetic tree. So if you'd like to learn more about this, and especially what that test entails, be sure to check out this video of mine where I take the test and go into the results. And if you enjoyed this video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. That really does help me out. You can also click right about here if you'd like to subscribe. It's completely free to do so. And you can follow me on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram at GeneaVlogger. I'm the GeneaVlogger. See you in my next video.